Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Polo. It's known as the sport of kings, but in Nigeria, it's become the sport of business kings. The polo field provides another forum for business giants to battle, and even government ministers and global giants like Coca-Cola are getting in on the act.
It's a sport where you can meet people. I think it was the famous Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, that said polo is a passport to the world.
On today's podcast, we'll look at how playing polo has become an essential part of doing business and whether victories on the field are translating to higher profits.
And this is Manil Suleiman in action. He goes all the way, 60, 40, 30, ball at the goal out. He gets it on.
I'm Jennifer Zabasajja, and this is the Next Africa podcast, bringing you one story each week from the continent, driving the future of global growth with the context only Bloomberg can provide. Joining me today is Bloomberg's reporter, Tiwa Adebayo, who is also a polo player, we should note. Tiwa, thanks so much for joining us. Let's just get right into it. Talk about how polo became such a big sport in Nigeria.
Well, the thing to know about polo in Nigeria is that it's actually almost as old as the country itself. It was brought over by British military personnel. It was first played by the cavalry. The first match actually happened in Lagos in 1904. But it's a very big sport and it's played by a lot of individuals. It's growing in Nigeria. There's around 27 different polo clubs. There's 33 different playing fields from Jos to Ibadan to Lagos. The Lagos Polo Club is definitely the eminent club, not just in Nigeria, but also in Africa as well. It's where the highest handicap polo tournament in Africa is played. Highest handicap meaning it's where the best players, the highest ranked players in the world play. The Lagos Polo Club itself has around 400 members now. There's about 750 active players in Nigeria as a whole. So it may come as a surprise to people in the West, perhaps, and in Europe, that polo is as big and people are as passionate about it in Nigeria and across the continent of Africa as well.
And Tiwa, I should admit my knowledge of polo is very limited. I know a bit about it. There was a special on Netflix, actually. I think it was produced by Prince Harry and the Duchess. But I don't know much about it. What I do know is that it is quite expensive, though, for people who do play it. Who is paying for it in some of these clubs in Nigeria?
Well, to really get an understanding of who's paying for it, you need to understand a bit about the rules of polo and the culture surrounding the game. So just a little crash course. On every team, there's 4 players, and one of those players is usually someone called the patron. And that person is responsible for funding the team. They pay the tournament entry. They usually own the horses that you play with, or they rent the horses. Sometimes they'll bring in a professional player as well, so they'll pay those fees. And they're essentially responsible for making sure it's all paid for and it all goes through. So that's how a lot of it is financed. But there's also the corporate involvement as well. So in Nigeria specifically, there's very large involvement by financial services companies, notably GT Bank in Nigeria, the title sponsor of the Lagos International Polo Tournament this year. They've been sponsoring polo tournaments for around 18 years. You also have Chapel Hill Denim. There's another title sponsor, companies and charities as well, such as UNICEF. So there's a lot of different sources of funding that go into the sport. But crucially, when I've been speaking to people, what they're saying is that the sponsorship is growing and it's also changing in shape. So it might have started off as these companies financing polo tournaments as a way to entertain their private wealth clients. For example, bringing people to the polo. It's usually a long day out and you can have drinks at the bar in between the matches. So it's a good way to entertain corporate clients. But they've moved from doing this to actually sponsoring the tournaments in a more traditional way that you might expect of a football tournament, for example. So having their logos up around the polo field and having their branding, crucially, on the live streams of these polo tournaments. That's another area that the game is expanding into. The Lagos International Polo Tournament was streamed on YouTube this year and it has been done for a couple of years. So the sport is expanding, and what I've been told is that these brands are really using it as a visibility platform, and they're trying to attach themselves to this label of premium level entertainment and luxury, which is a very lucrative market, especially for the financial services sector.
How important is it then for these businesses? I mean, you mentioned how it's growing. Clearly, they believe they have a clientele that they could tap into. How is it being seen as a business tool for some of these companies?
Well, I did a bit of research into this to find out kind of why they put their sponsorship and crucially their name behind these tournaments. And actually, GT Bank, they've described the Lagos International Polo Tournament played at Lagos Polo Club as a staple in Nigeria's sporting and social calendar. And they say they remain committed to driving positive change with it and also the impact and fostering of community of the sport. So it's clear they see a lot of different avenues with which they can grow their brand. And it's no surprise as well that the clientele that play polo are very useful for them. So just in the Lagos Polo Club alone, in its members, it counts the finance minister of Nigeria, Wale Edun, for example, Kola Kareem, famously the CEO of Shoreline. I spoke to him before this recording as well. He actually owns a polo team called Shoreline Polo. So he described it as a sort of natural extension of his company, as it were. He's a polo fanatic, one of the highest ranked players that isn't professional in the country. So it's useful for them to have access to these people. And the way it's been described to me is that if one of these companies were to set up a billboard, for example, on the side of the road, maybe 20% of the people that pass that billboard would be relevant, the target market that they're trying to reach. But with polo, as the former president of Lagos Polo Club, Adebayo, told me, they can guarantee really that 80% of the clientele there will be the people that they're trying to speak to. I spoke to the commercial director of the Africa Polo Network, Masedi Molasiwa, and he told me just how lucrative the sponsorship market of polo is.
It's modest, but in quantums of millions of, let's say, South African rands, because these are private, or they're not really that public. I'm giving you an estimation in the, anything ranging between 3 to 5 million rands, South African rands for Nedbank. The point I do want to say is that what we have observed is that once the corporate sponsor is on board, you do see an increasing level of investment in the quality of the tournament experience. With every passing year, the level of investment in the tournament increases and it's visible.
And Tiwa, stick with us. When we come back, we'll hear more about the soft power role that polo is playing and how it can potentially spill off of the field and into the boardroom. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Today, we're looking at the role polo is playing amongst Nigeria's business elite. Tiwa Adebayo is still with me. Tiwa, you've been speaking to some of Lagos's polo playing community. Talk more about what they were telling you.
Well, I had a really fascinating conversation with Kola Kareem, who is the CEO of Shoreline Energy and also the owner of Shoreline Polo. So I asked him basically, what is the business case for Shoreline Polo? Shoreline Energy is one of the leading energy and infrastructure companies across Africa. And he said to me that actually the Shoreline Polo team, as it were, has kind of always existed. So he plays the sport, his sons play the sport, he mentioned siblings that play it. So it wasn't a sort of surprise to formalise that into a fully funded polo operation. He told me that there's this real association between polo and excellence. And so it's no surprise that he'd want to associate his brand with that. We also spoke a bit about how polo can act as a bridge between Africa and perhaps countries in the West and even in the Middle East in terms of business links. Kola Kareem has recently been appointed as to the advisory board of British American Tobacco. And he said to me that working with these companies outside of Africa, he's able to use polo as a point of reference and a global platform, as he described it, to bounce off of. So I think it's really interesting how polo is building links between different countries, but also within Africa. I was speaking to Adebayo, who is the former president of the Lagos Polo Club.
It's a sport where you can meet people. I think it was the famous Prime Minister Winston Churchill that said polo is a passport to the world. The Nairobi Polo Club and Lagos Polo Club now have a yearly competition where we go to Nairobi and play, and they come to Lagos and play. And that alone has fostered social and economical benefits for both sides. We also play the Heritage Cup at Guards in England. The Heritage Cup is based on the Commonwealth teams playing together, playing in England. That already not only fosters Commonwealth relationship, but of course there'll be businesses there as well.
So it seems like it's a force that brings people together, as many sports do. And the president of the Africa Polo Network said to me that they see the sport growing into something akin to a golf or Formula One, for example, a sport that is perhaps targeted at a premium market, but with a very broad appeal as well.
Well, it's interesting that you mention a game like golf, right? You just take a look at some of the deals that have reportedly been done on the golf course, some of the presidents, I won't name names, that prefer to spend a lot of time on the golf course, and the business that has got done historically. Could that now, the role that we've seen golf play, could polo step in and sort of fill that void, at least in Lagos or in some parts of Africa?
Well, it does seem to be going that way, one, because of the clientele, but crucially, there is a networking element as well, because it's not just the players that make up the game of polo. To have a polo team, you need an extensive team of grooms to look after the horses. And those are often people who perhaps don't come from those same circles of world leaders and CEOs, but they have a love for horses that is shared between them. For example, Kola Kareem's Shoreline polo team this year have actually been playing with a groom. So that groom, the talent was recognised and he was moved up into the team. And I've been speaking to various players throughout the scene who have said to me that they've seen grooms be sponsored to complete their master's studies, for example, and then go on to work in financial institutions with their patron. And it can definitely change one's life. They can enter into an industry which they may not have been exposed to. And it does remind me of the game of golf, actually. You hear often about people that were caddies in golf and got speaking to business leaders or portfolio managers and were offered internships. So it seems like there is that same spirit of networking and entrepreneurship that goes on in polo as well as in golf. And it's growing in popularity, especially in Nigeria.
Which is why it would make sense for big global giants like Coca-Cola and others to get in on this, right?
Absolutely. Coca-Cola has a polo team that plays in Nigeria that bears the Coca-Cola branding. Then you have teams like MSD Baby Bear that is owned by the Dangotes. Kola Kareem tells me that there is a fierce rivalry between Shoreline polo team and MSD Baby Bear, obviously two big magnates of the energy sector within Africa. That rivalry definitely spills onto the polo field as well. And he spoke to me about the real desire to win because you're playing with the company's name emblazoned across you. But something else that's really compelling, I think, about polo is Kola Kareem put it to me and said there's only two things that stop people from playing polo. It's fear, and the second one is death. So it's a very dangerous sport. But I'm told that that camaraderie that you build, because you have to trust your teammates to such an extent, makes it easier to have dealings in the business world, because these are people that you really get to know on quite an intimate basis and in a very high pressure, intense and often stressful game.
I mean, those are two very legitimate reasons to not play this sport.
Absolutely.
I'm just saying. How competitive are we getting here?
It's definitely something that a lot of resources are being poured into. There is talk about building polo fields in Isimi, just outside Lagos, which is going to be a very big tourist area as well. There are developments going on there. But they want to, as well as growing the tourist attractions, they also want to grow the game of polo alongside that, because it's clear that there's appetite for it, to watch the game, to be involved in it, not just people that play it, people that are passionate about horses and passionate about watching too. So you're definitely seeing a very competitive level of the sport. But that is the thing about polo. It's one of the very few sports that you can't pretend to play, because at the end of the day, you have to get on a horse and go at about 30 miles an hour and also hit a ball at the same time. And I can tell you from experience, it's definitely not easy, and it's not always the safest, shall we say.
And thanks again to Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo for that reporting. And And here's a few other stories we've been following across the region this week. Sudan's army recaptured the national capital from the Rapid Support Forces militia, a turning point in a 2-year civil war that's drawn in outside powers and torn the resource-rich North African country apart. The advance is a major blow for the RSF, which had seized control of swaths of Khartoum and the rest of the nation after the eruption in April 2023 of a conflict that may have killed as many as 150,000 people. And South Africa, with the help of the World Bank, has a $3 billion plan to reverse the decline in services and infrastructure in 8 of its biggest cities. It will use a $1 billion loan from the World Bank, coupled with $2 billion of government money, to finance grants for cities including Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town that meet targets in providing water, sanitation, electricity, and solid waste processing under a new government program. And you can follow these stories across Bloomberg, including the Next Africa newsletter. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. This program was produced by Adrian Bradley. Don't forget to follow and review the show wherever you usually get your podcasts. I'm Jennifer Zabasajja. Thanks as always for listening.